Greetings one and all. Beautiful day in the Holy Land. It's always a beautiful day. Our condolence to the people of Chicago. I saw that it was 32 degrees over there. Really gets you into the spirit of cleaning for Passover. Springtime, 32 degrees. You know, we're with you. We're with you over here, sweating it out in the Holy Land. Another on a personal note, a few hours ago, one of my daughters who was married a year ago, Ruti Shachar, she just gave birth to her first child, a baby boy in the city of Netanya. So Ruti, if you're, after a couple of days, if you're watching this shiur is dedicated for you. Okay. Our subject today, as we're on the 5th day of Nisan, 5778, 10 days before the big time holiday of Passover. Our title today of the class is, are you part of the 20% that left Egypt or the 80% that stayed? Which group do you belong to? The 80% club or the 20% club? Now, this is very interesting. Approximately 4.5 years ago, the Pew Survey did a study on Jews in America. It was on October 1st, 2013, according to the calendar of the Gentiles. So that was the last in-depth survey that they did, and that back then, 4.5 years ago, the assimilation rate was at 71%. So this number, 80% of Egypt, which was 3,300 plus years ago, very interesting. Very interesting, because we're at that number again. 80% assimilation in America. Other places in the world, in Europe, it's worse. So very interesting how we're, once again, are we going to be the 20% club or the 80% club? That's going to be our choice. But there's going to be some surprises. Some of us might think that all the religious people are in the 20% club. We will see, not necessarily so simple. Okay, let's take it away. There's an amazing Gemara. It's in the tractate of Chagiga, page 14, side 1. It says there that according to the original plan, so to speak, of God, the Torah was supposed to be given to the world after 1,000 generations. That's right, 1,000 generations. 1,000, I'm not going to get into it right now, it takes too long, but trust me on this one, the number 1,000 represents a certain wholesomeness, a certain completion of a cycle of purity. 1,000 generations. However, God saw that the world would not be able to survive 1,000 generations without the Torah. So what God did was that we know that from the time of Adam and Eve, there were 26 generations. From Adam and Eve until Moses, there were 26 generations. I'm not going to go through all the 26 names, but you could look it up in your local Bible. You will see 26 from Adam and Eve to Moses. So God gives the Torah after 26 generations, which means what happened to 974 generations? God, as He prepared to create the world, was going to bring 1,000 generations. He only brought down 26. of the 1,000. So we are missing 974. Where are these? Should we call Beretta, Sherlock Holmes, Kojak, Mannix? You got to be a certain age to get these detective stories. But whoever got it, got it. Whoever didn't, missed out. Look at the reruns. So, what's going on with these 974 generations? So the Talmud tells us in Chagiga 14, side 8, says something very interesting. That God, what he did was, that he took these 974 generations, and he positioned them, he installed them in every generation. Now, there's a question which we will see. There's different approaches, but a certain approach is that these 974 extra generations, which were supposed to be created, but in the end were not, they were installed throughout the ages into the thousands of years of that the world is existing. So in every generation, we have a generation or so of the original 974 generations that never came into being. So that's one opinion, that in every generation, till the end of time, we receive an influx of people that are really the original character players from the time of creation or before the creation. According to other opinion, these 974 generations were installed within the 26 generations before the giving of the Torah. So Hashem installed 974 generations within 26 generations. So there was an abundance of people that really didn't belong there, but because God decided to create them before the creation of the world, then they came into the world. Now these people, these generations that we're talking about, these are generations who are very lowly, very wicked people. They are called the Azei Panim in every generation. These are the brazen-faced people in every generation. So we're talking about 974 generations, either up until the time of Moses, that were brought into the world, or we're talking about until our days, until the end of times, 974 generations that Hashem weaves into the already existing generations until the end of time. And as I said, these individuals, these generations are made up of very, very wicked people. Right? As we said, God looked at these 1,000 generations and he saw the wickedness and he saw that the world would not be able to exist to wait this 1,000-year period. Because if you give a person that's a good person, if you give them a long time, they can perfect themselves. However, if you give a bad person a long time, they can do a lot of bad things. So, unfortunately, the perfection of the world never came, and God had to, so to speak, step back and create and bring the Torah after 26 generations. Okay, so that's something we're going to deal with right now. That there are these generations of evil and wicked people that are planted in every generation. Very interesting. The Igra Dekala writes in his commentary on the Torah, Breshit, page 70. Listen to this unbelievable thing. In the time of Egypt, we know that the Jewish people, Pharaoh started really getting tough on the Jewish people. And now instead of providing them with bricks, now they had to go out into the fields and find straw and make their own bricks. So things were getting really rough. Now, what happened was when the Jews were not successful in bringing the daily amount of bricks that they had to produce, then what the Egyptians would do, they would take children and they would use them in place of bricks. They would stuff them in buildings. This way, many of the Jewish children found their death. So listen to the words, unbelievable. I have to warn you, this might be graphic. Put on a seatbelt. Here's what the Igra de Kala, the Bnei Yisachar, this is what he writes. He says, all the children that were thrown into the Nile. And that's a lot of kids, because according to our sages, 10,000 Jewish babies over the years, when there was a decree to throw all the first male-born Jews into the Nile, there were 10,000, according to our sages, babies that were thrown and killed in the Nile. So we're talking about a large percentage of people. And the Igra de Kala goes on and explains, not only these babies that were thrown and killed in the water of the Nile, but also all the children that were killed and placed as human bricks in buildings in Egypt. These were all people, these were all an entire population that they had no connection to the Jewish people. They were part of the 974 generations that are installed, that are integrated in every generation. We have large amounts of populations that are part of the 974 generations. An amazing statement. Surprised everyone is still sitting on their chairs. So these babies, these children that were murdered by the Egyptians, we thought that they were part of the Jewish people. They were not part of the Jewish people. They were part of the 974 generations that had to come into the world at different parts of it during different times of history, and they made their way. They integrated themselves within the Jewish people, and they were, okay, so the fact is that they had to be removed because they were tremendously wicked influences. I mean, now they're kids. You know, kids are very nice, but lots of times when the problem is when they grow up, you know, that's what they say. Kids are nice when they're little, but when they grow up, that's when the problems start. Little kids, little problems. Big kids, big problems, yeah. So this is an amazing thing. So therefore, Moses is crying out to God, God, how can you do this? How can you destroy these our children? What is their offense? What have they done? And God says, listen, trust me. God knows the future. God knows what's going to be. God said, listen, I know that if they're kept, if we keep them going, if we keep them alive, these children that are being tossed into the Nile, these kids that are being tossed into buildings, if they are alive, they will cause tremendous damage, spiritual and physical damage to the Jewish people. So therefore it's actually a blessing that they were removed. Amazing thing. This can also be found in the dispute between Moses and God about these children being killed by the Egyptians. This discussion could be found in the tractate of Sanhedrin 101, side B. Check it out. Okay, very interesting. So we have a lot of interesting souls walking around, being part of the Jewish people. The Jewish people are a tremendous amount of Jews. If you think about it, okay, we're talking about millions and millions of people. That's why the Egyptians were afraid of the Jewish people, because they were coming, as we discussed in previous classes, they were becoming so well-to-do, wealthy, and so powerful. And they carried a lot of clout. And the Egyptians were afraid that they were taking over the economy. They were taking over the money. So the Egyptians were very worried. So we see something very interesting. that these massive amounts of Jews, there's a large percentage of them that really do not belong to the core of the Jewish people. When I'm talking about the core of the Jewish people, we're talking about Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob goes down to Egypt. Go down, Jacob, to Egypt with 70. We're talking about that core. Okay? So there's the core of the Jewish people, which are the real McCoys. And then we have all kinds of hitchhikers, all kinds of generations that are being integrated within the Jewish people, but they really have no connection between themselves and the Jewish people. They were just integrated within the Jewish people, but they don't really belong. So, very interesting what's going on in Egypt.
Is that the Erev Rav?
Not the Erev Rav.
Aside from the Erev.
Aside, we got the Jews are in hot water. Jews are in hot water because besides for the multitudes of converts that they received, an amount according to Yonatan ben Uziel, the top student of Hillel, we're talking about 2 or 3 million converts in Egypt, that Egyptians that joined the Jewish people and have caused us since the exodus of Egypt until the desert and coming into the land of Israel until this very minute. They are causing us they have caused tremendous damage. But aside from that, if that's not bad enough, it's this 1-2 punch in your face. And these are the wicked within the Jewish people, that they are part of the 974 club. Listen to this, an amazing Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra writes on his commentary on the Torah, we're on Exodus 7:24. He writes an amazing thing, folks. We don't have any insurance, so hold on. Hold on tight. We're going for a heavy curve. He writes the following, that just like the Egyptians were hit with various plagues, the Egyptians were hit with 10 plagues, also the Jews, many of the Jews were hit with plagues. Which ones? Listen to this. According to the Ibn Ezra, folks, I mean, we're just like, we're blowing it away today. We're taking the roof off the sukkah. We're going for broke here. The Ibn Ezra says that there were 5 plagues that also affected and afflicted the Jewish people. Number one was the plague of blood. Number 2 was the frogs. Number 3 was lice. Don't start itching here. You know, I'm not going to itch either as a joke, you know. Boils and grasshoppers. We're not talking about David Carradine and grasshopper. When you're able to snatch the pebble from my hand, you may leave the shrine. Kung Fu. No, we're not talking about that grasshopper. Grasshoppers and, of course, darkness. Folks, 6 plagues. Excuse me. 3, 1, 2, 5. Yeah, give me 5, they say. An unbelievable situation. They didn't teach us this, you know, in the Talmud Torah that we learned, in the yeshiva that we went to, baby. They didn't tell us about this, Ibn Ezra. But what's going on is we're seeing a tremendously different picture of the pious, the religious, the righteous Jewish people of the land of Egypt. I mean, if you don't get it by now, the picture that we've seen that's going on within the Jewish community, and as I said, there are many, many different factions within what's called the Jewish community. Many of them are not at all part of the Jewish community whatsoever. But what we'll just call it within the Jewish community. I mean, there was a lot of bad stuff going around within the Jewish community, and the Jewish people, the Jewish community was afflicted with 5 plagues, just like the Egyptians were. Egyptians got hit double. They got the double whammy, 10, but we still got hit with 5. Okay. The Yalkut Reuveni writes, Exodus page 14. Listen to this. It says the following, that all the wicked Jews in the time of Egypt know that the leaders of these wicked, the leaders, so to speak, of these wicked people, these 974 generations, the leaders such as who? Get a load of this one. Datan ve'Aviram. Datan ve'Aviram. Every single bad thing that happens to the Jewish people from the beginning when they went to Pharaoh and they turned over Moshe to the Egyptian government after Moses killed an Egyptian that was beating up on a Jew. These lowlifes, Datan ve'Aviram, they went and they turned over Moses to the authorities from the beginning and till the end when the Jewish people are leaving Egypt. Well, guess who's not leaving Egypt? Well, Datan ve'Aviram, they ain't going anywhere. You know what I'm saying? They're staying there. They're keeping, they were part of the Egyptian government. They were overseeing the exodus of the Jewish people, making sure that they would come back to Egypt after 3 days, these lowlifes. So listen to what the Yalkut Reuveni is saying. He's saying that the heads, such as Datan ve'Aviram, heads of the 974 wicked generations that are placed into the world in every generation. And that's why we see in the desert most of the instigation against Moses was being led by these two wicked people, Datan ve'Aviram. They were influencing the masses of Jews to get them to go against, instigate them against Moses. And listen to this. There, according to the Yalkut Reuveni, he says here, Shein lecha dor vador, shein lecha mehem, that there in every single generation till the end of times, there are always amongst the Jewish people, part of these 974 generations that have to come into this world. They are a part of every single generation, these 974 generations, and they are the wicked amongst the Jewish people. So it's an amazing thing. Sometimes you look at I was looking at this Pew study survey that they did on the Jewish people 4.5 years ago. So it's very interesting how they show a very big dividing line between the religious community and the non-religious community. It's a very, very thick line dividing these two groups. It's like two different populations. And now we're getting a little bit of more of an understanding what in the world is going on. That there really are, within the Jewish people, there are all types of factions. Not what we were told, not what they're trying to sell us, how every single Jew is a jewel, is a gem, is a diamond. There's the core of the Jewish people, from Abraham, from Isaac, from Jacob, from the 70 that went down, from the 20% that left Egypt, and throughout the generations, the minority of the Jewish people. And after that, there's all kinds of factions that are trying to instigate against Torah, against the Jewish people, against the land of Israel, against ourselves. So this is very interesting. So we see, once again, that there's basically two opinions. These 974 generations, either they finished at the time of the giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai, after 26 generations. They all, the 974, were integrated within the 26 generations. These were the evil people in these 26 generations, including within the Jewish people. Or in every single generation, we have within the world, and of course within the Jewish people, this special camp of the 974 group. Okay, moving right along. Listen to this one. According to, we'll see this right away, according to the Mabit, okay, of Rav Moshe Mitrani, he writes in his Optimum book, Beit Elokim, in the Gate of the Foundations, 22nd chapter. Here's what he writes. That we should know that only 1 out of 5 Jews left Egypt. 20% of Jews left Egypt. An amazing figure. Imagine that. They're opening up the floodgates. They're opening up Egypt. You've been a slave there for 86 years. 116 years. You've been a slave, and they're opening up those gates now. You are free at last. I have a dream, free at last. Yeah. And only 20% decide to leave. Now this is after you saw 10 plagues against the Egyptian people, and you're still sitting on your blank, and you ain't going anywhere. So listen to this. According to the commentary, Beit Elokim, here's what he says. He says that the nations of the world, so they will not come against the Jewish people and say, listen, it's not fair. You know why you guys are so righteous? Because you were spared these 974 generations of wicked people. All these wicked people, they were dumped in our camp, the nations will say. So what did God do? He said, we're going to make it a fair game. We're going to make it a fair game. And the fair game is that I'm going to divide these 974 generations of wicked people into within the nations and also within the Jewish people. So it's a fair game. It's a fair fight. And listen to what he says. All the 80% of Jews, so-called Jews that did not leave Egypt, were part of these 974 generations of evil people that God had put into that generation, leaving Exodus, leaving Egypt. They all, the 80%, we're talking about millions of people to understand what we're talking about. According to most opinion, we're talking about 5 or 6 million Jews that left Egypt, and that's only 20%. So think about how many millions of people perished either by staying, remaining in Egypt, or being killed in the 3 days of darkness. Okay, moving right along. I'm glad people still are, still breathing there. Unbelievable stuff. Listen to this unbelievable Torah. As I said at the beginning, many of us would like to consider us to be the 20% group that left Egypt, and not the 80% that decided to stay. We would all like to consider ourselves. But it's not such an easy. It's not so easy to divide and say, oh, all of you with, the skull caps, you guys left. And all of us without, we didn't get out. Not such an easy, not so fast. Not so fast. We'll see there that there were people that, if you look at them, they might have looked very religious, but they were part of the 80% group. So let's look into this. According to Rav, one of the leading ethical leaders of the previous generation, Rabbi Levenstein. He was the spiritual counselor of the famous Bnei Brak yeshiva called Panovich. And listen to what he says. He says, I don't get it. If there were 80% of the Jewish people that did not want to leave Egypt, why does God wait till the end? Why did God wait till the plague of darkness, which is one before the end? We're talking about 1 month before the exodus of Egypt? Why did God wait so long to blow these people away? Listen to what he says. Amazing answer. He says, listen, Rabbi Richter of Panovich says the following. We have to understand. If you would have had a conversation with most of these 80% of Jews at the time, and you would talk to them about redemption and leaving and going up to the land of Israel and accepting the Torah, if you would have spoken to them about this issue, most of them would probably have said, listen, we want to be redeemed, we want to leave here, we want to go to the land of Israel. They would have agreed. Why? Because you don't have to put your money where your mouth is. It wasn't an option at the time. It's just talk. The Jewish people are in the middle of the mud. They're sinking in the quicksand of mud of Egypt, and they're talking about redemption, leaving, going up to the land of Israel, next year in Jerusalem. Hey, we're for it. We'll say the words. They might have said the words. They might have talked the talk, but they didn't walk the walk. In their hearts, in their souls, Rabbi Richter says they were very, very far away from this. And therefore, listen to this. Why does God blow them away in the 3 days? He blows them away because now the Jewish people are able to leave Egypt. Now it becomes a reality. The exodus of Egypt is now a reality. We have 1.5 steps out of Egypt. We're almost out there. Now you're going to have to take sides. Now we're going to have to take sides. Whose side are we on? Are we staying here in Egypt, or are we going to leave, exit Egypt, and go into the land of Israel, go into the desert, to go into the land of Israel, and to receive the Torah? So, says here, Rabbi Cheskel Ebenstein said that Hashem waited till the end on purpose in order to give these 80% an opportunity to stick to their words when they spoke and they said words of next year in Jerusalem and redemption, and we want to get out of here and we want to redeem the divine presence, and it hurts us that the Jewish people are enslaved and we want to go to the land of the living, the land of Israel. Talk, it was cheap. And therefore, God waited till the 9th plague. And it's dark. The Jewish people are able to get out of Egypt because within the Jewish people, it was totally light. Could have just walked right out of there. But they didn't walk right out. They went nowhere. When Hashem saw, now that we're almost finished, now that we're almost out of Egypt, now they really are showing their true colors, that all of it was cheap talk in their souls, in their hearts. They really do not want to leave the friendly confines of Egypt. Now listen very closely. It's not a simple issue. Let's not just brush it off. Oh, if I was there, it would be so easy. No, it's not easy. Let's look at this realistically. Think about it. You grew up. The Jewish people are 210 years in Egypt. 210 years in Egypt. That's a lot more than most Jews in America have been. That's a lot more than the Jews in America. So we're talking about kids born, their grandkids, great-grandchildren, great-great. Okay? We speak the language. We know the streets. We know the culture. We know the people. We know our neighbors. The Jewish people were all over Egypt. And now we're being freed. So now, why don't we just stay here? Folks, think about it. It's easy. The Rabbi Yecheskel, that's his point. He's saying it's very easy when you have no options to go anywhere. You have to stay put. So to say next year in Jerusalem. But once the gates were open, once you understood that the Egyptians were finished, and now you could choose to remain in Egypt, a free man, in a place where you grew up, and your children and your great-grandchildren, you have a house, and now you can get servants. Now the Egyptians will be happy to serve the Jewish people. You know, we're going to switch slaves. Jews were slaves. Now the Egyptians are going to be your slaves. They're happy to serve you after these 10 plagues. Now it becomes a very difficult situation, a decision. Are we going to choose to leave, or are we going to continue living in a comfortable Egypt? Up until now, for many people, it was uncomfortable. But now, we're free. Now, we're no longer slaves. Today, it's a totally different story. It's a different picture. The situation has changed. Now it was a big test for a person to leave. So it's easy for us to big mouth, to bad mouth the people that stayed. But let's look at ourselves in the mirror. Where do we stand? Where do we stand when the land of Israel today is open? The gates are open. We're able to leave. We are not slaves in America or in Europe. Are we rushing to go to the land of Israel, the land that God supervises all year round, that He's close? We have this personal relation, and we could talk for days and weeks and months about the specialness of the land of Israel. How come we're not running to the land of Israel when the opportunity, when the gates have opened up? So too, the Jews in Egypt, when the gates opened up and now they were free in Egypt, most of them chose to stay in Egypt. Amazing. Folks, open up your hearts here. This is an amazing Torah here. If you came, if you listened just to this point today, you made your day, your week, your month, your year, your life. This is an idea. It's an amazing concept. Amazing concept, folks. Whoever is listening to this is a lucky guy or a gal. The famous Meshiloach, the Ishbitzer Rebbe, in his unbelievable commentary on the Torah, Meshiloach, in Exodus, the portion of Bo, page 68, the second paragraph. The Meshiloach, the Ishbitzer Rebbe, asks a question. What exactly is the psyche behind the Jews that stayed in Egypt and died? Not all of them died in the 3 days of darkness, but many of them, or the majority of them, some continued to live and remained in Egypt. But the majority died during these 3 days of darkness. What is the psyche of these people that did not want to be redeemed? When push came to shove and the gates opened up and the decision had to be taken, they chose to stay. Where does that come from? You have a chance to be redeemed. You have a chance to go be free in your own land, not a stranger in someone else's land. Okay, you might not be a slave any longer, but our birthplace, the Holy Land, God brought us to this world, the Jewish people, to come into the Holy Land, to the land of Israel, and to fulfill the Torah in the land of Israel, and to build the temple. That's the idea. Not to be free in Egypt. So where does this come from? Jews that do not want to really be redeemed. They might talk the talk. Yeah, they'll say at the end of Yom Kippur, they'll say at the end of the Passover Seder, they'll say the words next year in Jerusalem, or they'll talk about a desire for the temple and redemption. But that's not really where they're holding. They're not holding. It's just words. It's just a cover. Their souls are very far away. Their souls are in the culture. Their souls are in the houses that they've bought, the mansions that they've bought, the streets that they've become accustomed to, the language that they've learned and become accustomed to. They become a part of that society. That's where they really stand. Listen to this. The Ishbisert says an unbelievable Torah. What was special about our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? The Talmud says that forefathers we only have 3. Mothers we only have 4. What was special about this group? You know what was special? Only about this group. That every thought, forget action, every thought that came across their mind, they were on such a high spiritual level that even their thoughts were pure. They did not entertain any fishy, questionable thoughts even. That's what high level they were. Their thoughts, they controlled their thoughts. Amazing. Many of us were in good hands if we're able to control our deeds. Think about controlling your thoughts. We only allow certain thoughts to enter, and the majority of thoughts, we keep them out. So he says, what's special about this group? Every single thought of theirs became reality for future Jewish generations. Which means, once our forefathers or mothers, once they had a lofty thought, that lofty thought was transferred from their minds to future generations till the end of time. And on the opposite side, if there happened to be a minority of negative thoughts, that negative thought became reality within the souls of Jewish people for all times. And listen to this. Folks, hold on. Abraham, Og, the king of Bashan, he comes to Abraham, he says, Abraham, I got some inside information for you. Yeah, let me hear it, Abraham says. Well, I want you to know that your nephew, Lot, has been captured. There's been a war. As you know, there's a war between 4 kings versus 5 kings that's been taking place. And your nephew, Lot, was captured. So now, Abraham's decide what to do with this information. Should he go out and save his nephew Lot, or maybe he should not? So you know what? So Abraham calls a timeout. Abraham calls a timeout on the court. And he says, let me think about this one. Abraham, you have to think about it? Abraham has to think about saving? Did we grow up in the JDL with pride that Abraham went out to save his fellow, we'll call him Jew, Lot? To save, he went against tremendous odds. This is one of the first things I learned from our holy Rabbi Kahana, this story about Abraham going out and fighting against the 4 kings in order to try to redeem his nephew Lot. But it's not a simple issue, folks. Why? Because who is this dude, Lot? Who is this guy? This guy is no prince. This guy is bad news. This guy is one of these, like, topsy-turvy. One day he could be a good person, the other day he's a wicked person. So I don't understand. Abraham is thinking, should I put on my life, my goal of my goal, which is influencing the entire world to accept God, and he was very successful, him and Sarah, they converted, according to the Zohar Kadosh, 1 million converts in their times. So they're very successful in bringing the message and the light into the masses. And what? This light is going to be endangered? Their influence to the world is going to be put perhaps in danger to go out and fight for some wicked guy named Lot? It's not a simple issue. So for 1 second, Abraham had a question. Maybe I should not go and redeem my nephew Lot in order not to endanger the enterprise that me and Sarah have set up, influencing and bringing the light of truth to an entire world. So when we're talking about dealing with millions, should we endanger ourselves for the life of one? And the Ishbitzer said, open up your hearts. That split second that Abraham thought, he entertained the idea of not redeeming Lot. That thought became a reality in every generation. Folks, do you hear what we're saying here? Wake up! In every generation, there are two groups of Jews. Those that want to be redeemed and those that do not want to be redeemed. And where do this group that does not want to be redeemed, where are they coming from? Where's their source? Their source is from Abraham. That split second that Abraham had a fleeting thought of not redeeming his nephew Lot. This thought was brought down into deeds throughout all generations till the end of time. And in every generation we see that there were Jews that chose to be redeemed, and there were Jews or populations within the Jews that chose not to be. Amazing. A question we should all be asking ourselves. Listen, Brother Yehuda, you got to be pulling my leg here. I don't get it. You want to tell me that 80% of the Jewish people did not exit from Egypt? We're talking about millions of people died. Why isn't there any national day of mourning for the Jews that decided not to be redeemed? Why was their memory erased? So folks, we could say very simply, and this is written in many places, that's right. We know that the Jewish people rejoice at the downfall of the wicked. And at times, we're not going to get into it, we have at least 10 classes on this subject. Go back to the archives. Many times, even amongst Jews, when we see the wicked of the Jews perish, we celebrate. So therefore, you're right. There is no day of mourning for the 80% of wicked population that decided to hang out in Egypt and not be redeemed and not be liberated. That's right. However, an amazing thing. I heard this question from a class. Somebody asked this to a rabbi, and he said, that's a good question. I don't have an answer. God was so good to me. God sent me the answer, folks. Put on another seatbelt. Put on another one. Listen to this. Remember 3 weeks ago, we had this holiday, it was called Purim. Yeah? Well, there was this evil guy who decided to destroy the Jewish people. His name was Haman. You know, that's where the Americans got the hey man. Hey man. It's really Haman. So this guy Haman wants to destroy the Jewish people, all the Jewish people, men, women, children. And he spins the dice, so to speak. He does a lottery. And he's so happy. You know why? Because the lottery comes out on the month of Adar. And Mr. Haman, he worked for Mordechai for many years in his house. So he knew a lot of the Jewish customs and a lot of Jewish laws. I once heard from a rabbi that when he's invited to speak at old age homes, Jewish old age homes, as you know, many times elderly people, second or two after, you start speaking, they fall asleep. So the only people that are listening to the rabbi's class, he told me, are the Philippine workers that have wheeled in their clients to hear this class. So we have these non-Jewish Philippine workers, they're listening to the class. And he says not once and not twice have they raised their hands, these Philippine workers raised their hand and asked questions. They said, listen, a few days ago we heard another rabbi, he told us the law on Sabbath is like this. And now you're coming along and telling us that the law on Sabbath is like that. So what should we do? Amazing. So sometimes, or not sometimes, we see in the Torah that all the wicked people that wanted to destroy the Jewish people, they always knew some of the Torah. They always knew a few things. They had underneath their hat a few tricks. They knew a few verses of the Bible. So listen to this, folks. Open up your hearts. An amazing chidush. I sent this to the rabbi. He said, awesome. There is a national day of mourning. Not only mourning, okay, as in M-O-U-R-N. We're not talking about mourning as in M-O-R-N. There is a national day of mourning and fasting for the Jews that died and perished in Egypt. Got it? Well, I'm going to tell you about it. We're now in Tosfot. We're in Tosfot. We're in Tosfot on the portion of Bo on page 24. The Tosfot, the commentaries, say the following. That why was Haman so thrilled when his lottery fell on the month of Adar? He was so thrilled because he knew two bad things happened to the Jewish people in the month of Adar. Number one, he knew that Moses had died on the 7th day of Adar. But number two, they never taught this to us in school, in yeshiva. Maybe we have to get back to yeshiva. They didn't teach us this one. On the 13th day of Adar, on the 13th day of Adar, 80% of the Jewish people began to be exterminated during the 3 days of darkness. Listen closely. The 3 days of darkness began 1 month before the holiday of Passover. 1 month. So we're talking about the middle of the month of Adar. On the 13th day of Adar, the 80% began to be exterminated by God in the 3 days of darkness. So we're talking about the 13th, 14th, and 15th day of Adar. So Haman knew this fact. He knew this fact, what many rabbis today do not know. That on the 13th day, the Jews began to perish in Egypt. So he was so thrilled. What better day to declare as being the day that we will destroy the Jews of Persia? That's why he chose the 13th day of Adar. And that's, folks, that is why, according to the Tosfot, in order for us to remember the Jews that perished in Egypt, we have a fast day every year. It's called Ta'anit Esther, the fast day of Esther. This is unbelievable. Now this is brought down in many, many books. I'm just going to give you a few, so jot it down, those serious students out there. Number one, this is brought down in the Chida, Exodus 10. Chapter 10, look it up on the 3 days of darkness. This is brought down by the Rab Eliezer Migirmaiza, Bala Rokeach. He brings this down too. This is brought down in Halacha. This is brought down, this piece of information that the Jewish people, the reason why Haman picked the 13th day of Adar to destroy the Jews of Persia was because 1,000 years before, the Jews of Egypt were eliminated by God in the 3 days of Choshech. This is brought down in the Jewish Code of Law. Look it up. 693, paragraph number 1. So this is brought, I just gave you 3 or 4 books to look up. It's brought down in many other places. In the few minutes that we have left for our loaded question, are we part of the 80% or part of the 20%? Listen to this. The commentary on Yonatan ben Uziel. Commentary on the Yonatan ben Uziel. First of all, Yonatan ben Uziel, he writes on the book of Exodus, chapter 10, verse 24 and 25. Listen to what he says. It says that when the Jews left Egypt, those that, the 20% group, club, when they left Egypt, a verse says in the Bible, Ve'amar Paro livnei Yisrael. Pharaoh says to people of Israel, what in the world is going on here, folks? We're talking about 80% of the Jews were eliminated. We're talking about 20% of the Jews left. Who is Pharaoh talking to? He's talking to the people of Israel? I thought they were they're either not here or they were blown away. Who's he talking to? So Yonatan ben Uziel tells us that just like Datan ve'Aviram, they stayed back. They remained in Egypt. They were not killed in the 3 days. Why not? That's a different class. Maybe next year we'll talk about it, why they were not blown away. But just like Datan and Aviram, they hung out in Egypt when the gates were open and they were no longer enslaved and there was freedom for the Jews of Egypt, they decided to stay and remain. There were others. So that's what it says. Pharaoh was having a conversation with Jews, with the people of Israel that remained. So listen to what he says. The commentator on Yonatan ben Uziel, he writes the following, that there were 2 groups of wicked Jews. There was a group that died in the 3 days of darkness, and they never saw the redemption. And there was a group of Jews that remained in Egypt, and they saw the redemption, but they chose to remain in Egypt. Oh, baby, take me away. Oh, Ethel, I think this is the big one. I think this is the big one. Here I come. Take me away. Lee, I don't think you got that one. 2 groups. So, the commentator on Yonatan ben Uziel says, which group is worse? The first group that died in the 3 days of darkness, or the second group that remained in Egypt, and they saw the redemption, but they saw it from a distance. They saw it on Fox. They saw it on Sky News, on CNN, but they saw it via satellite. They did not participate in it. And he says here, the first group The first group is much worse. They were much more wicked because they saw the redemption and remained. They chose to stay. Those that perished in the 3 days of the plague of darkness, it's true that they did have 1 foot out of Egypt, but it's only 1 foot or 1.5 feet. They still had a doubt what was going to be. There was still a question mark on the future of the Jewish people. But these that chose to remain, and they see the redemption happening in front of their eyes, and they chose, and they continue to choose to remain, and they see the redemption happening in front of their eyes. Think about that. Where do we stand when it comes to this question? We see before our eyes, open up our eyes, look at the land of Israel. Just like the Talmud has said, the land of Israel is beginning to give off. In the last 70 years, the land of Israel has become transformed from swamps and malaria and disease-filled desert. It's become unbelievable. Number 1, Israel, number 1 in agriculture. Look at the agriculture. Look at the wines that Israel produces, the fruits and vegetables that are produced here. Look, the homes, the amount of Jewish homes that are going up. We see the redemption process in front of our own eyes. And we, like those that chose to stay in Egypt as the redemption was unfolding. It wasn't the last. It wasn't finito. It wasn't that's all, folks. No, it was the beginning. The Jewish people had left Egypt, and the Egyptians were going to run after them. And then we would be in the desert, and we would have all kinds of tests. It's a process. And they decided to choose to stay. They chose to stay. Now that Egypt is a free country, we grew up here, our children, great-grandchildren, great-great-great-great-great, we have jobs here. We'll be able to have Egyptian slaves here, taking care of our kids, nannies. We know the culture, we know the language, we know the walk, we talk the talk, we walk the walk. Things have changed here. Things are, the economy here is going to really pick up. Things were looking rosy. Which group? Let us pray that we are the 20% club.